The occurrence of earthquakes has always been both mysterious and unpredictable. Scientists have spent tireless years poring over the little evidence available in an attempt to better understand this tremendous natural phenomenon. And while substantial progress has been made in the way we predict and measure earthquakes, they will always remain just one of the many mystifying marvels of our planet. The year was 1811. The place, New Madrid, in a section of the Louisiana Territory that has now become known as Missouri. On December 16th, those living in this newly formed rural community must have felt as if the end of the world was near. Despite being located far from any plate boundary and situated well within the North American plate, this unassuming farm town along the Mississippi River lies atop an otherwise hidden threat.
You have what's called failed rifts in the mid-continent. They're places where the crust tried to split apart at some point in geologic time, and then it didn't succeed in splitting the continent, but it created a rift or structure deep in the crust where it's different. It's kind of weaker than the other areas, and so that's where you get the major river valleys, are along these failed rifts: the Mississippi River Valley, the Ohio River Valley. And the St. Lawrence Seaway is another one. And the bigger earthquakes seem to happen in those areas.
The tremors that occurred during the winter of 1811 and 1812 resulted from the fault's readjustment to stress. To make matters worse, this failed tectonic plate boundary is located below ancient river sediments, making the area a highly dangerous zone in the occurrence of an earthquake. And indeed, this ancient fault system is responsible for the enormous amount of damage caused by these quakes. None of these early settlers would have anticipated such a destructive force lurking beneath their feet. The first shock occurred just outside New Madrid on December 16th of 1811 at 2 o'clock in the morning. Aftershocks lasted until 7 a.m., when another large tremor was felt, this one as strong as the first. The third tremor occurred at 11 a.m. This was by far the strongest and the closest to the city. Aftershocks from this quake lasted well over a month until, on January 23rd of 1812, at 9 o'clock in the morning, when yet another shock was felt. The final and most devastating shock occurred on February 7th, just after 3 o'clock in the morning. This last tremor remains the largest earthquake ever recorded in the contiguous United States. A large area around the Mississippi River was subsided, forming swampy areas and lakes. Ground elevation was permanently lowered 15 feet, forming Lake St. Francis and Reelfoot Lake. Liquefaction was widespread, forming sand boils and mud volcanoes. The event was so tremendous that it caused the Mississippi River to temporarily change its course, creating the Kentucky Bend.
It sounds really dramatic that you're reversing the course of the mighty Mississippi, and if you look at the river, it comes down and then it makes this really tight S bend, and probably the reason that bend is there is that this fault cuts across the river. And so when the earthquake happened in February of 1812, which was the biggest earthquake, it was a thrust, so the motion was like this, and it crossed the river, so the riverbed all of a sudden got raised up. And in some places, depending on where the motion was, in some places you actually had waterfalls because all of a sudden the downriver side dropped. But in other places, because it goes through this bend, the downriver side actually went up, and that was enough to send a pretty big wave, essentially, going back up the other way.
The tremors were felt over an area of 50,000 square miles. By comparison, the historic San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was felt over a mere 6,000 square miles. More than half the town of New Madrid was destroyed.
There's been a lot of controversy about exactly how large the New Madrid earthquakes of 1811, 1812 were. Some people who've studied these things think that they may have been the largest earthquakes in American history, in the continental United States, possibly as large as 8.2, 8.3. More recent studies have, I think, shed new light on this and indicate that these earthquakes, while large, were nowhere near that big.
When people first looked at the effects, they found these really dramatic effects, saying that in Cincinnati, Ohio, there were The cabinet doors were swinging, and in Louisville, Kentucky, there were chimneys damaged, and it sounded like they were really dramatic effects. And so people looked at those and they came up with these really high magnitudes. My magnitude estimates were like low magnitude 7, which are still pretty big, but they're not like magnitude 8, like great earthquakes that we have here in California.
So the question remains, will we ever be able to predict the next New Madrid earthquake? Such an attempt was made by Iben Browning, a retired biologist who predicted the next New Madrid earthquake would occur on December 3, 1990. He came to this conclusion by associating periods of high tidal stress on the Earth's crust with the predicted earthquake. The media was in a frenzy over his prediction, despite opposition from the scientific community. United States Geological Survey scientists were hired to study Browning's prediction. Tens of millions of dollars were spent in the preparedness for the earthquake, and it goes without being said that December 3, 1990 passed without any noticeable seismic activity.
It's really amazing that that prediction got taken seriously, because he has this idea that tidal stresses are linked to earthquakes. But even if that were true, tidal stresses come and go. There are times when they're high, there are times when they're low, and clearly you don't get a big earthquake every time you have high stresses. So to say here's going to be high tidal stresses and then you're going to predict an earthquake for a specific area, you're like really out in left field.
Browning's prediction inevitably did more harm than good, in that it served to make people suspicious of other future predictions.
And there is no valid prediction scheme for predicting earthquakes on the level of, hey, next Tuesday at 3 o'clock, over there's going to be a magnitude 7 on fault X. We can't do that. Nobody can do that.
And what about the claim that the region is long overdue for some ground shaking?
One possibility is that, which I think is plausible, is that the earthquakes in the central U.S. are going to happen in one place for a while, but then maybe jump around. And so the next big quake could be someplace that, we're not even thinking about now.
Scientists don't anticipate a repeat of what happened in 1811 and 1812 for a couple of centuries at least. But a magnitude 6 earthquake is thought to be long overdue. One thing is for sure, however, there will be another one. And until that time, residents of New Madrid can only wait.